I'm your only service leader. So I am going to make the strong request for your support in singing the prayers with me so I can see our energetic connection together. And tonight's service is going to be abbreviated. This is the fifth Friday of April. And so I thought that we would change it up a little bit, and we'll speak a little bit more at the second half of our services. But when I saw that Rick Stone had come out with a new book, Story Intelligence, I thought it would be a great opportunity to be able to learn with him and to be in conversation about the importance of story to each of us and to our community as well. And so I want to invite people to stay on. There'll be a conversation around the power of storytelling in a lot of different ways. It's an awesome book. I am probably somewhere between a third and a halfway through it, though I haven't been reading it linearly. And so I encourage you to stay for this conversation. And our service will be abbreviated for that reason. So we're going to get started, and I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us this Shabbat. It's really wonderful to have all of you with us. Particularly want to give a warm welcome to all of our guests who are joining us. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, either here on Zoom or on YouTube, it would be wonderful to be able to connect and see you. We're going to begin with lighting Shabbat candles, and I'd like to invite Paul Marquardt and Tom Wollenscroft to light our candles. Good Shabbos. It's good to see you. And friends, if you want to light your Shabbat candles as well, please do so with us.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Good
Shabbat shalom. Invite us to bring in the Shabbat light. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen. Good Shabbos. It's lovely to see the two of you. Thank you for lighting our Shabbos candles.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And want to invite all of us to continue to bring in some lights. As always, as we continue to create Shabbat together on Zoom, as I was saying, I really invite you to sing and pray along with me this evening. While you might see me on speaker view, I have you on gallery view so I can see your beautiful faces. And I always look forward to going back on YouTube and seeing who's joined us. When possible, please feel free to join us on camera so that we can build this connection the best to our ability. I want to invite you to robustly use the chat. Please feel free to share your insights, to give each other warm wishes. If you're a guest, introduce yourself. If you're a member, to welcome our guests. And so just make sure that we use the chat wisely and respectfully, but I think it's a great way for us to connect. And while I'm not going to say anything specific until it's in writing, I do want to let all of us know that the COVID task force met last night, and I believe that there will be some emerging changes that we will be discussing with the congregation in the coming week. And then we've set up another meeting for 2 weeks. So I think that we will be rolling out some changes and involving the conversation in some feedback around some of the changes that are ahead of us. And so we're in another kind of transition time when it comes to COVID. And so I just wanted to kind of invite you to keep your eyes open for that communication. So friends, speaking of light, we're going to sing Yadid Nephesh. You'll find the prayer on page 7 or 9 in the prayer book. Page 9 is the transliteration. You can also find it in the chat. Yadid Nephesh av harachaman mishoch avdecha el retzonecha yaharutz avdecha kemo ahayal ishtachave el mul hadarecha terahav lo yedidutecha mino feitzuv vechol ta'am hador na'eh ziv ha'olam nafshi cholat ahavatecha ahana ha'elna refahana hala beharot la noam zivecha az titchazek v'tihitrachape v'ha'ayta hala simchat olam yada da 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 yada da 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 yada da 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 yada da 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 yada da 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 yada da 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 yada da 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 yada 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 da da yada da yada da 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 ya da 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 da. So friends, I'm just going to invite us to take a deep breath and let us settle in a little bit to Shabbat. Let us settle down. I don't know about you, but for me, it was quite a hectic and challenging week. And I am so relieved to have arrived at Shabbat and to be here with you. And just want to invite, my mind knows that Shabbat is beginning. I want to invite my body to join my mind. I want to invite my soul. And so just take a moment of quiet, and then we'll sing together Shalom Aleichem, which we'll find on page 13, as a way to welcome that Shabbat amongst one another and within ourselves. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei HaSharet, Malachei Elyon. Excuse me. Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem l'shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Barchuni l'shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon. Ni Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Seitchem l'shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So as we move more deeply into springtime, wanted to invite us an opportunity to listen and even sing along with the contemporary psalm called Beauty. And so invite us to connect with this video, to sing along with me in the video, and we will join together with other psalms on the other side.
Everywhere there is beauty, and I see beauty. Everywhere that I go, lift me up from despair. Come and soothe me, reach right through me, hold me harder than I've ever known. Everywhere there is beauty, and I see beauty. Everywhere that I go, lift me up from despair. Come and soothe me, reach right through me, hold me harder than I've ever known. Seems like the cost of life is so much higher than what we had saved. A sea of frost and ice is trying to bury us under its weight. Just look around. Why is it that you're so afraid? Everywhere there is beauty, and I see beauty. Everywhere that I go, lift me up from despair. Come and soothe me, reach right through me, hold me harder than I've ever known. A few dozen years to hang around and take things past where they were when we came. Some fly away, some run aground, some spin in circles, but if it's all the same, I'd rather walk. Will you help me find flowers on the way? Everywhere there is beauty, and I see beauty. Everywhere that I go, lift me up from despair. Come and soothe me, reach right through me, hold me harder than I've ever known. Everywhere there is beauty, and I see beauty. Everywhere that I go, lift me up from despair. Come and soothe me, reach right through me, hold me harder than I've ever known. Everywhere there is beauty, and I see beauty. Everywhere that I go, lift me up from despair. Come and soothe me, reach right through me, hold me harder than I've ever known.
Friends, join me on page 25 for Psalm 96, Shiru Ladonai. Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Miyom Liyom Yeshuato, Yadid Nephesh, Yadid Nephesh, Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Miyom Liyom Yeshuato, Yadid Nephesh, yai-dai-dai, yai-dai-dai-dai, yai-dai-dai-dai-dai. We move on to Lecha Dodi. We invite ourselves, regardless of the challenges or any of the struggles of the week, that there is still love in this world and that we can open our hearts to connect to that sense of love as we enter Shabbat. You'll find the words in the chat, or you'll find the verses starting on page 41. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yalalai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala yalalai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad Hishmianu el hamyuchad Adonai echad u'shemo echad L'shemo tiferet v'lihitila Hey lecha dodi likrat kala yalala 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 Pnei Shabbat nekabela Lecha dodi likrat kala yalala 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 Pnei Shabbat nekabela hitoreri kiva ha'orehu mi ori uri shidaberi kevod Adonai alahayich nigla hey lecha dodi likrat kala yalala 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela lecha dodi likrat kala yalala 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela yaminu smoti frotzi V'et Adonai taritzi Ayaharish ben pahartzi V'nismecha v'nahagila Hey lecha dodi likrat kala yalala 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 Pnei Shabbat nekabela lecha dodi likrat kala yalala yalala Pnei Shabbat nekabela boi v'shalom ateret bala gam b'simcha uve'etzola toch emunei am segula boi kala Hey lecha dodi likrat kala yalala 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela lecha dodi likrat kala yalala 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. So as I mentioned earlier, tonight is an abbreviated service, and we will move to the Shema. And so we'll find the Shema on page 65. And before we enter the Shema and take a little bit of our own spaciousness and connecting by closing our eyes, just want to share with you a teaching that I learned from Rabbi Sari Laufer. And she quotes an article where the author is talking about what he calls the busy trap. Essayist Tim Greider says that the busy trap is indicative of people who tend to lament their busyness. That when we start thinking about how busy we are and we promote as a society or as a country our busyness, it is often purely self-imposed. Work and obligations that we've taken on voluntarily, classes and activity that we've been encouraged either ourselves or our family members, our children to participate in. And that often many of us find ourselves busy because of our own ambition, our drive, and our anxiety. And that there's a way that we can become addicted to busyness and dread what we might have to face in its absence. I certainly can relate to this. There is a way where much of my life has been in relationship to what does it mean to be busy. And I so appreciate Judaism with Shabbat as an opportunity to slow down. But in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Emor, there's another kind of teaching about why pausing, why creating moments to settle down and for us to actually get what's behind some of the busyness. In this Torah portion, God says, Ela mo'adai, these are my fixed times, God says. But in Jewish tradition, mo'ed means more than time. We have the Ohel Moed, which is the tent of meeting. It's the place that Moses goes to encounter God. In modern Hebrew, a moadon, which comes from the same root, is a gathering place or a lounge. And so this idea to call our festival holy days as they are in this Torah portion as moed, it's not that this is just a fixed time. It is an ingathering. God introduces the festival calendar with the language of relationship so that it gives us an opportunity to set some space in our lives to connect with what matters and with who matters most. And so as we say the Shema, we connect to that sense of oneness and can put aside all of our drive, all of, potentially the ways that we might excuse busyness, and recognize that we have this opportunity to be in oneness with what matters most and with whom matters most. Feels incredibly important. So just take your moment and close your eyes. And take a breath. And let us chant the Shema together. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavecha uvechol nafshecha uvechol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'leftecha v'derech u'shafbecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam le'ohot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha. We move into an opportunity to say a prayer for healing for those that we pray a refuah shlema, a healing of body, of mind, and spirit. I'll read those names now, and you can find, I'm going to invite you to put in your names into the chat. And when you're finished, I'm going to invite us to add the words to the Misha Berach in the chat as well. Tonight, we pray for healing for Richard Adler, Marilyn Pankin, Maureen Camelson, Richard Cohen, Jenny Williams Cohen, Mario Eugene Hudson II, Lois Birch, Andrea Finn and Bev Corfin, Uli Sprick, Ellie Emmerich Hart, Shai and Billy Nach, Claude Baruch, Jordan and Jamie Schwartz, Tesla Queen, Janice Blackman, Beth Ann Bootycant, Nancy Davis, Megan Redant, Janice Roger, Pilar Barkley, the Baton Snook family, the Levin family, the Kolbs Reckelman family, Grady Floyd Adair, Eyal Schechter, Audrey Galix, Dolly Wax, Esther Myers, Ellen Leary, Monique Gauthier, Julio Quintana, Jacob Gutman, Rona Crozi, Patty Marcus, and David Kay. And so you'll find the words to the Misha Berach in the chat. And I'm going to invite us, as people are still adding names, I Haley, if you'll add the words one more time. Mi sheberach Avotenu Mekor habracha Imotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach Avotenu Mekor habracha Imotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. And of course, that melody and those words were written by Rabbi Debbie Friedman and Rora Settle. And so we have some brief announcements this evening. I'd like to invite our president, Teresa Presswood, to give those announcements, and then we'll conclude with the prayer for of hiding and Mourner's Kaddish, followed by our conversation tonight. Shabbat Shalom, Teresa. You are muted.
There we go. Shabbat Shalom and welcome to our services tonight. We are so glad to have so many here from around Atlanta and around the country to be a part of our virtual services. There's a lot going on at CBH in the coming weeks. Let me just tell you about next week. Join us on Monday with Rabbi Gottfried, and she'll be leading a lunch and learn at noon. Join Gayanne on Monday at 6:30 for Monday Chant. The second session of Getting to the Other Side of Sadness, Finding the Meaning of Grief with Nancy Kreisman will be on Wednesday, May 5th at 7 p.m. Mindful Moments continues every weekday at 8:45. 15-minute evening minyan, now this was formerly known as 10-minute minyan, continues Saturday through Thursday at 8:30, and everyone is welcome to join. Next weekend services on May 7th, join us as we introduce our interim rabbi, Rabbi Dale Friedman, at services at 6:45. On Saturday, May 8th, we'll have a bar mitzvah of Jack Morris at 9:30 a.m. All are invited to attend. You may have heard our food security project is looking for new fresh faces and drivers to deliver food on Friday afternoons. It's an easy and meaningful way to make a big difference. CBH supports 15 families each week. And if you're interested, I've done it a few times, and it really is a meaningful way to start preparing for Shabbat. Email Rebecca Grapevine at rgrapevine@gmail.com to sign up. And we've got a lot going on in May. Join us Friday, May 14th at 6:45 for an intimate and personal service honoring Rabbi Josh. And then on Sunday, May 23rd at 7 p.m. for a tribute and a roast of Rabbi Josh. More details will be sent out about these programs soon. And as a reminder, please support the new album, Red Thread, from CBH Chorus Band and Strings. You can purchase on Bandcamp, or you can get a CD if you still want one of those on the website. And it's streaming now on Spotify. As always, there's a full listing of all of our offerings. Look on the CBH calendar on our website. All Zoom links to our programs can be found on the streaming services section of our website. Bookmark this page and you'll always know where to log on for CBH programs and events. Shabbat Shalom, and thanks for joining us.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much, Teresa. Appreciate that. We want to invite Mariana Kaufman to lead us in the prayer for the end of hiding. You'll find the text in the chat.
As LGBTQ Jews, we are aware of the loss of integrity we suffer due to the pressures of the larger society. We often feel forced into a dishonest presentation of ourselves to ourselves and others. The LGBTQ individuals who feel they must pretend to be something that they are not. The Jews who feel they must be alienated from their tradition and community to win larger acceptance. Both are victims of a theft of identity and integrity committed by the sexual, gender-identifying, or religious majority. Creator of the universe, we ask that our hiding draw to an end, that we no longer feel we have to pretend, to promise falsely, to renounce ourselves, and that our fullest creative expressions as Jews and as lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, and queer people be among the blessings you bestow upon us. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. For those who are saying Kaddish this evening, I invite you to put the names of those that you're honoring with this prayer. And I think that we are a small enough group tonight that if there are folks who would like to unmute and say Kaddish together, even with a little bit of the dissonance, it would be okay. And as you may have seen, there was a tragedy in Israel on Lag BaOmer, which is usually the celebratory time during the counting of the Omer, where during a stampede, there were some collapses, there are people who fell, and dozens of people died at a festival celebrating Lag BaOmer at Mount Meron near the city of Sfat. And so we include all of those people, both those who have survived and are wounded, in our prayers of healing I saw was in the chat. And we also remember those who died, as Israel still rocked from such a mass loss just yesterday. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, please join me. 131. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be a blessing. Yitkadal, v'yitkadal, may Rabbah, Bi'amad divra, firtei, yamlich machutei, v'chaye dachol bein Israel, b'adalah, man kari, v'imru, amen. Yehesh may Rabbah, le'olam, omei, omaya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yishtabach v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei kudsha b'richu le'elam mikol b'rchata v'shirata shushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'oma v'imru amen. Yishmaya v'chai Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. We conclude the service part of this evening by singing Oseh Shalom. May the one who creates peace in the heights create peace for all of us, for all of Israel and the entire world. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, imru, amen. Oseh Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'himru amen. Yahaseh shalom shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahaseh shalom shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. So friends, want to invite this conversation. I want to also encourage you, if there are questions that come up or insights that you have to the questions that Rick and I will be asking each other, please put them in the chat. We know that story is important to so many of us, and so I think this is a great opportunity. One of the things, and I say this delicately, but that, well, actually, I'm going to start with a story. So the story that I want to start with in introducing Rick, which is not really about introducing Rick just yet, is about when the chorus traveled to the Spoleto Festival. We were in this amazing sanctuary. It was historic. It was grand. It had this beautiful chandelier above. And for a variety of reasons, and I know that we're on YouTube, so I'll be kind and gentle, the service was not a service that many people connected to. And so as we were walking away, a number of the members reflected to me at that moment, how did I feel being in such a grand space? Did I sometimes feel, that we who've had a much more humble journey, that somehow all of the honor and glory of what could be, I gave up to be as a part of this community? And my initial response was, I will always choose people over chandeliers. And for me, that is really true. And I say that by saying that whenever I talk to people about Congregation Beit Haverim, when you're not around and when you can't hear me, I generally say something like, this is an extraordinary community where I have the privilege of working alongside and serving some of the smartest, some of the most dedicated, some of the most talented, kind, thoughtful, creative people. And so that's really how I've talked about all of you whenever I travel. And I say that to also say that because we're a community that appreciates informality, appreciates authenticity, and appreciates accessibility, we're also a community that doesn't always recognize the greatness that is within us. And in one ways it's wonderful because we're humble. And on the other hand, we sometimes miss exactly how talented people are. I sometimes think that we have an honor issue at CBH, and not for anything of ill will, but I think that we have a hard time walking the value of honor at the same time as walking the value of down to earth and accessible, which I think are really important hallmarks that make us unique. And I think that, moving forward, it'd be something to consider balancing. And I really say that now to say that, many of us relate to Rick as one of us, and as I'm looking at you, there are so many talented people who are with us. But Rick has been incredibly talented, and you might know that from his one-man show that he brought to Beit Haverim, but really his work in story and being a nationally recognized speaker on the power of storytelling. These are the kinds of things that we often kind of dim down. And I really just want to say that, at the same time that we appreciate the ease of being able to connect with Rick, he is somebody who has worked with diverse organizations and Fortune 500 companies. He has authored a number of books, including this newest one, Story Intelligence, which I was saying the beginning of services is quite a wonderful book. And so it really was this great honor as we look at, kind of, I look winding down to connect with Rick about the power of storytelling. And so that's where I wanted to begin this evening. And I think that we are really grateful to be with someone who is such a master storyteller, but also who really deeply understands the power that story can bring us. And so, Haley, I'm going to invite you to spotlight both of us so that we can be in conversation together.
Thanks so much, Josh.
You're welcome. Shabbat shalom.
Let's tell you, there's a birthday party going on out in our townhomes. I don't know if you can hear the music or not. Maybe the microphone doesn't pick it up, but if you hear,
got you.
The Vita playing behind me, I don't know.
Be honest. Are you saying that you are so accomplished that you have people serenading you wherever you go?
Yeah. The band follows me everywhere.
We should all be so lucky.
Yeah.
So, I really want to kind of start this evening by kind of just saying again that I really find your book, Story Intelligence, to be remarkable. And it seems to be a culmination of so much of your life's work. And so I'm just wondering if you would share with us the premise behind what is story intelligence and maybe even a little bit of how you came to this idea.
Yeah, so in my work, I've been mucking around with story for over 30 years now. And this book became an opportunity for me to weave together and begin to see the threads that form, I think, a very rich fabric and tapestry about the way story impacts us in so many levels. And so, along the way, I've been gifted with some great teachers, some in the Native American community who have given me insight that has been very profound. One of those was a woman named Paula Underwood, who was from the Oneida tradition. And Paula, in her tradition, said that they don't even have a word for teach. The closest thing they had was enabler of learning. So for me, what was useful in that journey is that I've begun to see story as fundamental to what it means to be a human being. And it is so fundamental that we don't even see it. We're like fish in water. We're swimming in stories all the time. Our Jewish faith is filled with stories. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. And we can't understand ourselves without reflecting on our journey through life as a story. Stories are the things that divide us, but they're also the things that can heal our relationships. And our ability to envision a better world, to even think about tikkun olam is in itself a story that we want to create. And what's so interesting is that about 25 years ago, Daniel Goleman came out with the book Emotional Intelligence, and he was not the first to come up with that concept, and I'm certainly not the first to come up with the concept that story is fundamental. But there was a whole bunch of research that was being done on the brain and on the body, and we found how instrumental emotions were to life, and I think we're at the precipice of that again, is that we're doing all these wonderful MRI studies of the brain, and we're discovering that we can't even think about our brain without thinking about story. Is that probably the evolution of our brain happened along with story along the way, and so I kiddingly tell people that we need a new name, that Homo sapiens does not do justice to us. And those of you who are Latin scholars, you'll probably be angry with. I've been using Homo narrare. I've been told it should be Homo narrans, but that we are storytelling creatures, and that may be the thing that defines us more than anything else. Is the fact that we story our world continually, and we can't think of ourselves apart from that as story. So part of the book is really hypothesizing that there are 7 powers of story, and it's looking at how those impact us. There's the power to transport. Stories can take us someplace and another place in time, and we willingly give our hand to the storyteller. And it's it's called the suspension of disbelief. I said, the cow jumped over the moon. No one says, well, wait a second, cows can't jump over the moon. We say, what happened next, right? we want to go there with you, and we give permission to the teller to take us there. And stories have the power to do that, and we use them in our communication, but in very powerful ways. And we use them for learning, and it's the way we create meaning in our life and find coherence in our experiences, is to try to make sense of our experiences, is seeing it as a story. We can take very difficult and painful things and transform them through the power of story. We don't have a lot of time to talk about that, but and I think stories can unite us, and we can look at ways that stories can do that. And then finally, they help us envision the possibilities of the future, a better future. So for me, it became the language through which I see everything. And Elizabeth, I think that people know me more as the appendage to Elizabeth Cohen. That's Elizabeth's husband. Yeah, what does he do? And so we often have these discussions that so for me, everything is story, and you can't escape it.
Yeah. When I think about, our creation story, actually Judaism has more than one creation story, but it starts by speaking. And so in some ways, part of what I hear you saying is how fundamental stories are in creating worlds, in creating future, in creating who we are. And I think that that's part of a Jewish message. And I also think that so much of Jewish teachings is also be really careful with this tool because it can create great harm. And so I'm wondering in what ways you think story intelligence impacts Judaism, and and how is it found, and how does it relate to your personal Judaism?
So many years ago, I really got interested in the concept of Lashon Hara, which now we're looking at the other side of the coin of story, because story in some ways is neutral, but it has the power to create tremendous harm and has the power to create tremendous good in the world. And so our wise sages who preceded us understood that story, we had to be very careful with it. It was so potent and powerful that it could destroy lives. And we've seen how that works in our life. And that we have to watch what we say in a very profound way. On the other side of the coin is that story can create a map. They create maps for us. And I think we need maps in our lives. So if you look at the liturgy, and you look at Torah, and you look at the stories, the narratives that get woven through that, they create a map for our lives and our experiences, and they help us know where we are along the way. And they tell us when we have lost the path, when we are not on the path. So for me, that has been a crucial part of that. And there are narratives that we all struggle with profoundly. The Akedah, Abraham has got Isaac there, and he's going to sacrifice him. And that story, I don't know why, but there was a period of time when I was laying tefillin in the mornings, and I was reading that story each morning, and I would cry. And so these stories, they touch us in ways we don't even understand, I think, but they touch us deeply. And then, you and I were talking the other day, is that there's this profound meta narrative that we're involved with, which is, the Passover story. And this story, we all have imbibed and lived that story as children. And every year we repeat the story, and because we enter into the story it's as though not that Moses was leaving Egypt, we were leaving Egypt, and we get to experience what it was like to be oppressed. We get to experience what it was like to find the land of milk and honey, and to find something of wonder. And so I think that, especially in Judaism, but I think in every religion, you can't have a religion without narrative. Otherwise, we'd have an empty bucket of prescriptions and do's and don'ts. And those don't work very well. And And if you look at most indigenous cultures, and I think Judaism, we were tribal, is that the way you taught young people was through the stories. That's the way you socialized them. You learned about what was good and what was bad, what could get you into trouble, and what would be rewarding. And so those stories are crucial in that sense.
We find ourselves in the book of Leviticus, which is light on narrative. There is some, and heavy on those prescriptions. And it's one of the books that people wrestle with and struggle the most. But part of how people end up unpacking it is by encrusting it with stories related to the prescriptions. And so, I think that what you're saying is profound. And I want to go back and even just underscore what you were saying about our master story being the Exodus out of Egypt, is that the commandment is to tell the story as if we experienced it. So even Judaism has encoded it, the wisdom that we can actually transport ourselves into an experience that we didn't physically actually have, but that spiritually in some ways that we could have taken on. And I think that to me is so profound in that way.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that our forefathers understood that, they understood that the way that we would carry forward the life of Judaism was through the stories. How did they know that? And that's what I would say is story intelligence. They had a deeper wisdom, and that's what story can provide us. They saw its impact. They saw that stories went to the heart of things for people, and a good story is like a prescription from your doctor, but it's in the, and our son is a geneticist, and all the the new medicine is really about a medicine that is just for you. It's to your genotype, and I think I think the wisdom of Judaism is understanding is that stories can have that precise effect on our soul.
Well, so that's interesting, and that makes me want to kind of just divert from our questions, just to ask you, is there a story that is resonant for you right now that's like the prescription for your soul at this moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it's interesting that the Hasidic tradition, as you know, has had those stories have often spoken to me. And I mean, the story that I built, the story of the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid, that I created that performance, was built around a story that was told to me 25 years ago by Zalman Schachter Shalomi. May his memory be be really regarded as wonder. He was a great human being and a great teacher. And he told me this story. He told the story at a workshop, and I was so taken by it. I said, would you tell it to me again with my recorder? And so I tape recorded it. I wish I had. I don't even know where that tape recording is today. I have lived with that story for 25 years. That story still resonates inside of me. And it's a story of a journey, of finding your way, and filled with, it was a story of miracles and revelations that were surprising. So that story continues to speak to me, and so there are a few folk tales that continue to speak to me as well. I mean, Paula Underwood, who's this Native American teacher I worked with, she tells a story called "Who Speaks for Wolf," and I am still using. I must have worked with her back in the 90s, and I still use that story continually as a kind of as a pivot point in terms of my discussions with people about the importance of story and learning. And I've actually built a whole product around the insights from that story, a contemporary product to improve patient safety. It was built on the insights of a story that's probably 2,000 years old.
It's interesting. Susan Simon was asking, is that story in the book? And it is in the book. And so actually,
I retell that story
today.
Yeah. So that story is in brief there, and there are other stories that that have moved me along the way. There's a wonderful story in the book about Stephen Carter and his experiences, and this is weaving back to Judaism. He's African American, and his family moved into a white neighborhood in Washington, D.C. when he was very young. He was probably 8 or 9. And he was sitting on the porch there in this all white neighborhood, watching as people went by, and no one smiled, no one waved, no one welcomed them. And he was thinking, this is not going to be a welcoming place for me. This is not a place where I'm going to make any friends. I am going to be alone here. And then this woman was bounding up the sidewalk and said, "Hi, welcome to the neighborhood, and I'll be right back." And she ran into her house and came back with a plate of sandwiches, cream cheese sandwiches, and she became a fast friend, and she was Jewish. So she was steeped in the story of welcoming and loving the stranger, and that changed everything for him. And it changed everything for him in terms of thinking, what does it mean to be civil with each other? And how do we create a society where we can really care for each other, regardless of the superficial things that distinguish us? But she understood that our humanity is shared and connected in that way. So those kinds of stories really do speak to me. So I got some questions for you. So, and when we were talking and planning this evening, what was interesting for me is to learn about your own journey with story and how it has deeply informed your work as a rabbi. And I was wondering, I bet no one in this congregation really knows much about that story and how it has deeply informed how you think about being a rabbi and all of the work that you've been doing over the last 25, 30 years.
So, I appreciate that question. As I was been marinating, and I realized that I am the grandson on two sides of my father's father, who used to tell me these fantastical stories about the gray claw, and he would encapsulate his travels around the world in these adventure stories. And I could not get enough of these as a very young kid. And they were scary. There was some fear in them that the protagonist was always being followed by this shadowy gray claw that was disembodied in some kind of weird, I look back and it's so weird, but I still remember, and I can actually feel it in my body. And on the other side, my mother's mother, would regale me with stories about her life and mostly her kid's life. So she would tell me stories about my mom and her twin brother and her older brother. And I just remember that whenever they would come to our house, she would get up early and I was an early riser, and I would go into her bed and my grandfather was still sleeping. I would get in between them and she would just tell me stories. And so I think in this very early time, having both of these grandparents tell me real life stories and fantastical stories really shaped a relationship. I went to Northwestern University, in part, some poor college advising. Not that it was a bad school, but probably was not the right school for me. But I had wanted to do theater. I was Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, which most people do know. There's a lot of story in there, and Shalom Aleichem stories. And, I felt like it was a great way as a senior in high school to kind of embody my Jewish spirit. And I thought, and I told my parents that I wanted to be in the acting school at Northwestern, which at the time was one of the best in the country. And they were like, pay your own way, figure it out. if you're going to major in acting, you're on your own. And so, and as the dutiful son that I was, I majored in other things and always saw the theater building from afar. I had a roommate who was a theater major and was envious. And so I saw they had a storytelling class and I thought, let me sign up for this storytelling class. And it was full and you had to be a theater major. So I set up an appointment to talk to the professor. I had to wait 2 hours outside of his office. That's how delayed he was for our appointment. But it was because I waited those 2 hours that he said, I would normally not let a non-theater major in this class, but your commitment will let me, has me intrigued. So I got into this class with Reeves Collins, who was kind of a nationally known storyteller, and loved this class, and it really brought story alive to me. And he and I connected really well. And so I did an independent study in Jewish storytelling. And so my senior year in college, I would go around the local synagogues in Evanston and the Chicago area telling Jewish stories. Elijah stories were the stories that I was most interested in, in that kind of way. And so, I would say that because of the ways that people could be transported and brought into another world and actually find Judaism exciting and interesting, and that Judaism has such a rich folk tradition. And I would say that as somebody who is often seen that there's tradition that, kind of came from the wisdom, the rabbinical side, and that's what's revered. And the folk tradition was of the people. And I would say that I'm an of the people person, not that I don't appreciate Talmud study and all. And Talmud has wonderful stories that I think sometimes also get over. But, I thought that there's really powerful wisdom. And if you even go back further, the folk tradition was often passed down by women, whereas the more rabbinic was passed down by men. And so as somebody who has seen myself as an outsider, I thought it made sense that the folk tradition is where I had a deep connection in those early times. And then the last thing that I will add is that I start many of my Devar Torahs with narrative. I'm a narrative theologian. I think that stories can encapsulate some of how we make meaning and try to make sense of the world. And I call that our relationship with God in some ways, whether people are comfortable with God or not, you can take God out of it. But I think so much of that lives in our stories. And it was really women theologians that brought this narrative theology to the fore. And I feel that the way that I, as a gay man, can be a rabbi has been through the door that women paved. And so I feel like I have come through that door. And of course, they gravitated to saying, our stories, our lives matter. And then lastly, my story is really a unique story. And I'm just coming to terms with that as I'm winding down, because there hasn't been a rabbi of any duration, a gay rabbi serving the South in general, and specifically, there's not been one of a gay and lesbian founded congregations. And then across the country, there's been, to my knowledge, there's only one gay man who has served a congregation for any substantial duration, which I'm saying is 5 years or longer. I think the other rabbi was in San Francisco who left that pulpit before I was even ordained. And so in many ways, I've been in this journey without any natural colleagues. And so part of what I hope to do next is to understand what my story has meant as an individual, unique kind of experience Jewishly, that I think relates to this sense of being an outsider, and that Judaism itself loves outsider stories. We were the outsider tradition. We are we tell that. And so from the margins, there's a lot to learn. And so I want to be able to reclaim and claim my story in ways for the unique journey that it has been, which of course CBH is at the center of that story.
There's a couple of interesting things in listening to you is that your early experiences with your grandmother, right here at Emory, we have colleges, and some of you may know Marshall Duke or Robin Feibush, who've been studying intergenerational narratives for 30 years. And it was a wonderful discovery for me to find them here and become friends with them. And but they say that the thing that is the best predictor of children having high self-esteem and resilience is knowing their family stories. And you just wonder just how pivotal that was for you to have that from your grandmother, and how that has served you in ways you may not even know. And the other thing that's so interesting is that the stories of Elijah the prophet, there are more stories out there about Elijah the prophet than any other character in the Bible. There are more stories about this character, and all of them are from the folk literature. And he shows up everywhere, whether it's at the Passover Seder or whether it's at a bris, whether someone is kind of perplexed, and it says, I'd love to have a dream in which Elijah shows up and guides me. And so it'd be interesting, I think, just for our congregation to explore this whole body of literature around Elijah's stories.
Absolutely, and in part, as I was reflecting, is that Elijah has a whole personality in the Tanakh, so in the prophets, and he's an angry and alone figure, and somehow, because of his ascension to heaven in his chariot, which I love already that's fascinating. I'll go back and say I loved the Hebrew part when I went to day school. I loved the Jewish Hebrew part of the day because I thought that stories were much more as a part of that learning than even the ways that history was taught. And so you have someone ascending to heaven in a chariot. That's pretty cool. But he was kind of a grump, and people kind of chased him away because he had he had unpleasant messages for people, like shape up. But then he becomes softened in the rabbinic tradition, still a little bit more enigmatic. And then he becomes the voice of the poor, the needy, the redemptive, the person that comes and teaches us important life lessons. And so just that whole arc of Elijah is a really powerful one for us to explore, that there are 3 Elijahs in our tradition, even though it's the same person.
But what people don't know is that Enoch, who is the only other figure in the in Torah who died but didn't die, he just was carried off into heaven, and that shows up in Genesis. And so there was enumeration, so and so lived so many years and then died, and it got to Enoch and he didn't die. And supposedly the Elijah stories were Enoch's stories initially. And what's interesting is the Christians adopted Enoch as a kind of model for Jesus. And so I think the early rabbis said, "Oh, this isn't going to work. We need to change." And so those stories got transposed into Elijah's stories, which is also an interesting, just the history of story and how it weaves its way. When you think of our identity and humanity as Jews, what is the role of story in deepening that and helping us to become more of who we are?
When I look at the Torah, I really see that the Torah has multiple voices, and so that there are different people who are coming forward, sharing their stories within this text, a unified text. And there is one voice that is saying, because we were strangers, know the heart of a stranger. And when we look at the Abraham and Sarah stories about their rushing to welcome the stranger, and that kind of our first matriarch and patriarch become the symbol of incredible generosity and thinking the best about the stranger rather than the worst. And I think that from the very beginning, Judaism invites us to look at things a little bit differently than how we might naturally encounter a sense of fear of difference. And I really love that. There is the fear of difference in the Torah all over. And so sometimes we get confused because we think it's just all one voice. But I think if we can see the Torah as an expression of the multiple voices of the time and competing stories, I think it actually can help us understand our humanity in our country right now, that we have some competing narratives. We have the xenophobic narrative and we have the welcoming narrative. And that I think that ultimately what wins out Jewishly is the welcoming narrative. But if we were to take that into the 20th and 21st century, I was given both narratives because of the Holocaust, right? So the Holocaust, or the ways that I was taught Jewish history as a litany of sufferings where we survived. There was the story of, don't let this happen to anybody else. You need to be someone who is going to speak up for the vulnerable because you know what it is like. So very much like what's already in the Torah. And then I also had those stories of, it is a very scary world. People do not like Jews. People do not like queer people. Be careful, stay away, be insular. And because that's how you'll survive, right? It's not, it wasn't just to be fearing to alienate. It was your survival depends on this. I think those are both important stories. And if I were to acknowledge that I'm always generous or I'm always welcoming, I wouldn't be honest. That both of these stories live within me. But when I see myself on a spiritual journey, I know which story I want to empower. And more, I can recognize when I'm starting to feel scared and really can ask myself, is this a matter of survival? Can I speak up? Like, is that just that story memory? Or is it that potential of, oh, I can make a difference here because I can still be vulnerable and walk my spiritual truth, which Judaism holds out, which is love the stranger, which is do not stand idly by. Support your kin in need. And so all of these kinds of ways, love your neighbor as yourself. So I feel like I have an arsenal of, and maybe that's the wrong word, I feel like I have a cornucopia of these spiritual teachings that are rooted in this story. And I want to empower that side. Not that I ever want to endanger my survival, but I think that where I'm at often, I'm willing to take risks for my spiritual story.
One of the ideas that I talk a lot about is a concept I call storylines, and that we each have the capacity to take any situation and make a decision about what story I want to live in with regard to the facts, the circumstances I'm living in. And so there are facts, there are things that happen, but my interpretation of those and the story that I weave becomes my responsibility. And sometimes we reflexively just fall into storylines, and we can continue to live out a storyline for years. And that can lead to a sense of victimhood and a sense of powerlessness. So we have to become conscious of the fact that this is working and that we have choices to become the authors of the story. And, the word author and authority, they have roots together. And so who has authority in your life? And so I think, being able to choose which story, which of those two sides of the story do I want to choose in this moment becomes crucial. One last question for you.
Great.
So, you're embarking on a new journey here soon, and the story is not written yet, and you're engaged in the middle of that. But I'm sure that at some level it's going to involve social justice in some profound way. What has the role of story played in how you see that issue, and perhaps how you're seeing the next step in your journey? Wherever that's going to take you.
So in a lot of ways, given the kinds of questions that people have asked, like, what do you mean you don't know what you're doing next? Fully, that I realize that this is the kind of decision that sometimes can freak people out, or or even maybe unintentionally hurt people's feelings, like, why are you leaving? And, in one way, I think that, as I've said, I've been sensing that there's a different kind of call in this moment for me. And I feel like I need a little space to be able to hear what that story is, that it's emerging. And so, I think that, that's why I feel like this book came at the right time for me, because I feel like it helps me begin to identify the storylines, and I feel like that this will be a great resource for me in this place of spaciousness. And I think that I really am actually in this intersection of being attracted to social justice causes and being willing to take greater risks than I ever have. And at the same time, what is potentially a cousin to social justice is social healing. And I'm really actually feeling myself just as drawn, if not more deeply drawn, to social healing. And what does social healing look like? And, a lot of things that I've been offering is that our activism needs to be more spiritually motivated and connected. And so I feel like with Judaism as such an important kind of foundation to who I am, that I bring these stories with me into that sense of, knowing when it's time to advocate and to be kind of a fierce, to bring a fierceness into the world, to say, no, this is wrong. but also to understand that sometimes what might be even more powerful and more challenging is to stand and say, wait, how can I hold the whole narrative? How can I hold all sides and see if there's a way to bring healing into a torn and ruptured world? When I went to the Dominican Republic with American Jewish World Service, as I wrap up, we went to a women's center that was named after a activist, Mama Tingo. She was a farm labor activist, and basically people, as a black woman married to a black man, white farmers or lighter skinned farmers came in and reclaimed their land, which happens to indigenous people all the time, that people come in and take their land. And she was not literate. She was not, there were many things that, the kind of education that we would think, someone would need. She became this incredible organizer of farm workers and a connector. In part, her religious tradition was her anchor, but she began to weave community in really powerful ways. Unfortunately, she ultimately ended up being assassinated. That's how effective she was, is that she was organizing the country and she was assassinated. And so built on her activism was this community center where women would gather from all over the Dominican Republic once a month to share their stories and their work together so that they were not just in conversation with each other, but could create and hold each other in support and healing. And the Shabbat that we were there, it was a Friday afternoon that we were there, and we listened to them tell their stories, and they were working on projects like the new masculinity and trying to bring healing to where domestic violence had happened, to also working for women's equity and equality. And in part, they would do it with singing and dancing and storytelling. And so they brought some of their singing and their dancing, and we were a group of rabbis, and they said, can you sing for us? And, we gathered and we said, you know what, tonight is Shabbat Shirah. This is our freedom moment. And so we sang Ozi v'Zimrat Yah with my strength and with my, and with godly song. We will find that balance of our power, the redemption. And, it just really felt like these layers, that so many levels of advocacy and healing were coming together. And so that's just, I would say, a story that I bring with me of wanting to figure out how to weave these things together, for the betterment of our community, our world, and in some ways, as remaining as emeritus, I hope that I can bring some of what I'm doing. And we have so many people who I think are interested in this kind of work, that we potentially can go out into the world together. There's a lot that needs to happen in the building, in terms of our tending, but I also think there's a lot that we can bring out, even more than we have. And I look forward to seeing what that might be.
I kind of wrap up the book and I'd say that, our story intelligence is crucial for two things, which is tikkun olam and for tikkun halev. So how do we heal ourselves and how do we heal the world? And if we don't understand story and how it works in our lives, we won't be equipped to do that well. And so I think we have to become better equipped and better discerners of the stories we consume, but also better equipped to envision what story we want to create.
And I'll announce it more formally, but I'm in a conversation right now, which would be just very part-time, but there's a fellowship around social healing, and I'm in conversation about the possibility of coming on as a chaplain or a spiritual director to the social healers who will be part of the fellowship.
Fabulous.
So, and that will be something that's happening nationally, and that feels very exciting as the next part of the story, which in other words is going to be listening to a lot of other people's stories and honoring them.
That's a whole other facet. We haven't talked about story listening.
Yeah. Next time. Thank you so much, Rick.
Hey,
I appreciate it.
It's been wonderful. Thanks for having me on to do this.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you for for listening. Hopefully this was a meaningful conversation. And I strongly recommend checking out Story Intelligence. Feel free to unmic yourself and wish each other a good night, a Shabbat Shalom. And please join us next week as we welcome and introduce Rabbi Dale to the community.
Good night, Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks, Rick. Bye.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick and Rabbi.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah,
That was a great
So
discussion.
much.
Awesome.
it was, Rick. And after Shabbos,
you.
I'm going to want to find out where to buy your book, because I know I'd be interested in reading it, and I've got a friend who I think would really like it.
You can get it on
Put a
Amazon.
link in the chat.
Amazon.
Rick, put a link in the chat.
Oh, okay. But you
Then I'll
can,
have to save that link for after Shabbat. I'll just have to look it up.
Rick, if you
go to
send me
Amazon or go to storyintelligence.com.
Okay,
Rick, if you send me that link, I'll make sure it goes into the bet mail. Just
Okay, great.
great. Thank you.
Good
good
job.
night.
Good night.
Thank you.
So